Hello and welcome to Pieces, the podcast, where we'll work on outlining the intersection of our personal and political work.
Here, we want to create a place to talk about how our relationships with ourselves and our communities are inherently political, integrate the knowledge we've received and continue to receive, and speak to and dream of justice, love, and community.
I'm Ella, they, them, a consent educator and workshop facilitator who is obsessed with conflict and diving deep into human relationships through somatic experiencing.
And I'm Carson, they, them. I'm dedicated to making space to question our systems and trying to build resilience, community care, and solidarity into the everyday.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I love that. What are we going to be talking about today?
So today our topic will be white supremacy culture. I think the idea of how we got here and what our thesis will be, we got from Timo Kuhn and the website whitesupremacyculture.info. That's also where we're sourcing most of the quotes that we'll be including here. But our thesis here, would you like to read it out, Ella?
What we are going to get into today, the thesis is from Timo Kuhn's website saying, our commitment to racial justice is a healing practice for all aspects of our lives. We think that that is true. Today, we are going to be specifically focusing on conflict and accountability and using white supremacy culture as a lens among many that you can use to reflect upon your life, your patterns, and your relationships. And I think that that's a through line throughout our podcast in general, is if we're looking at capitalism, if we're looking at the neoliberal personality from last episode or white supremacy culture from this episode, this isn't saying this is the way to understand your life. It is just a lens, a way that we can analyze these things. And we enjoy little theory structures at the beginning of our podcast to explain what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the things that we've spoken about a lot, Ella, is this idea of having so many different complementary frameworks in analyzing like what is happening in our world, because we live in a wildly complex and nuanced world. There isn't ever going to be kind of one theory or one framework that's going to be able to explain it all. And I think what's helped both of us a lot in our work is having knowledge of like all of these kind of intersecting, overlapping systems and structures in our lives and being able to look at things from different perspectives.
Totally. And I saw something online recently that was like the different stages of healing. And I can't remember the whole post, but one thing that really stuck with me was that one of the phases is name it to tame it. At the beginning of any process, just understanding what is it that's happening, what's the word for it, how can I conceptualize this, gives you a foundation of just being like, okay, this is a thing that I can name and therefore understand that it exists. And that's where we're at with this podcast. It's episode 3. We're starting off at the very beginning by just saying, what are the forces at play that affect conflict and accountability processes? If we're analyzing it through the lens of our commitment to racial justice is a healing practice for all aspects of our lives, then how can we name the influence white supremacy culture has on it in order to just tame it a little bit, see it for what it is, and be able to work with it and engage with it in that way. So what are we going to be talking about today, Carson?
So originally here, we had a piece talking about the origins of whiteness, because we were like, we're going to talk about white supremacy culture. But then
we realized that we had gone too far off the deep end into theory, and it would be very difficult to bring people along with us. Therefore, we did last week's episode. If you would like to dive deeper into the origins of whiteness and blackness as terms applied to people, if you want to learn a little bit more about white supremacy culture, what that means, please listen to last week's episode. That is the foundation. And today, we want to really focus in on conflict and accountability and how, using the lens of white supremacy culture, you can uncover so much about who we are as people, how we interact with others, and using that kind of friction of conflict as a catalyst for growth and personal development.
Yeah, because we realized, like, oh, we actually need to talk about what white supremacy is and why it's bad for white people also before we start talking about like the real nitty gritty of the interpersonal. So we hope you don't mind our little outfit switch here. And yeah, enjoy the episode where we're going to talk about the 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture, or at least the ones we see as most relevant to our interpersonal relationships.
And just very quickly, what are those 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture?
Well, I would be happy to tell you. Tema Kun defines the 15 characteristics as perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, quantity over quality, worship of the written word, only one right way, paternalism, either or thinking, power hoarding, fear of open conflict, individualism, progress is bigger, more, objectivity, right to comfort, and fear of change.
Thank you. So, in this episode, we're not going to be diving deep into all of them. What we decided to do was talk about conflict and accountability. And when one of these characteristics came up, we would name it and say, this is how, if you look at the cultural values of white, middle, and owning class culture, these 50 characteristics are a foundation of that culture.
Yeah.
And how do these different characteristics pop up when we are looking into our sense of self and our way of relating with other people?
Yeah, whether it be white people or people who are black or brown, it doesn't matter. It's showing up in all of our relationships. And so that's what we're focusing on this time. And if you're more interested in kind of whiteness and its effects, that would be last time.
Enjoy the episode. And I think that is how we can come to our main topic of the day, which is accountability and conflict. Mm-hmm. Something that Carson and I have gotten absolutely obsessed with.
Oh, yeah. I think I've been obsessed with it for so long because that's a space of so much growth and so much learning. I love it.
On a very basic level, if you think about what makes something move, like basic intro level science class, if there is no friction, there's no way to like move forward in any way. You literally need friction and resistance as a way to like have movement. I'm a scientist, can you tell? But I think it's true. And I think that it's such a gift to analyze where that friction occurs, where that like rubbing and discomfort occurs as a way to learn about yourself, learn about what it is that you like, what it is that you don't like. Wow, I am a unique, special person because of the preferences I have. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I was texting a friend recently and I was like, yeah, I was going to make like lentils for dinner when he came over. And he was like, oh, I don't like lentils. And he also had a bunch of other stuff. And he was like, sorry, so many preferences. And I was like, no, amazing. Like the more preferences you have, the more I can get to know who you are as a different person than all my other friends. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's such a stupid example, but it's so true of white supremacy culture where it's this conformity. Mm-hmm. How can we have like a one size fits all model that is like the basis of this category that erases everything that came before it mm-hmm. in service of being part of the category? And how can we see ourselves as people who have preferences and learn about them and be like, oh, cool, what you just did really pissed me off. I did not like that. Mm-hmm. Now I know more about myself as a unique person, different and separate from everyone else.
Yeah, and also like, so we're already talking about perfectionism. Perfectionism is one of the 15 characteristics. We're not going to name them all. If you're interested in looking up what the 15 characteristics are, you can go to, again, the website is whitesupremacyculture.info. We will, of course, link it as well. But we'll just kind of go through naming kind of when we start talking about a characteristic. So one of the first characteristic is perfectionism. And I think like one of the things around having perfectionism show up in our relationships and show up in our conflict, for example, in this idea of like this person who doesn't like everything, like it stops you from being like the perfect house guest, right? Like you can't just like fit in everywhere because you have preferences about food And that would be bad, right? That makes you different from other people, and that makes you a difficult guest to have. So like I think like that's kind of like an interesting one for me, at least, like that really shows up a lot, is like this idea of like what are the structures that in society that tell us like what a perfect guest is, a perfect partner, a perfect friend, a perfect child, a perfect parent. And like how do we get caught up also like in our relationship with ourselves, trying to reach these ideals that have been given to us by white middle and owning class norms.
My apartment is a mess right now, and it just keeps getting more and more of a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started a little group chat with my closest buddies, and it has a lot of disco emojis, and it says, "I'm burning out." And it starts off with a voice memo of me saying, "I'm burning out. My apartment's a mess, and I need some help. Burn it." And I was just like, "Hey, who wants to come over? I'll make some food. We'll blast some tunes. Can we all just clean my apartment together? Because I need it to be like a designated time, and it's
Mm-hmm.
big, and it seems too big for me right now." Uh, and I was telling a friend about this, and they were like, "Amazing! Like you've kind of gotten through the I need to be perfect. I need to like have an amazing house. And it's not that like the pressure to clean is coming from everything needs to look perfect, but it's like it's a mess. I can't live like this. It's
Mm-hmm.
affecting my mental health. I need this. I don't have to hide it from my friends that I'm acting this way.
Yeah.
I can invite them in and say, "Hey, let's all do this together," and turn it into a fun bonding moment where we blast some tunes, eat some food, have a good
Mm-hmm.
time. And I think that this idea of everything has to be perfect, the apartment has to look perfect, if you're having trouble with it, you should pay someone to come and clean your house once a week or twice a week or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That denies you so much like joy and love and connection. Like I would so much rather have a party with my friends and like enjoy this rather than have that kind of like very transactional superficial relationship of like it needs to be clean, how do we get to this desired outcome.
Mm-hmm. Well, also because like I find this so interesting about our culture. Like there's like this facade that we're expected to maintain. And I think like this is what interests me a lot about like monogamy as an aspect of like organization for white supremacy culture and for like capitalist culture is like, okay, so your partner who you live with is like allowed to see behind the facade, but like if someone else sees behind the facade, like that's like not cool. So like your friends aren't supposed to see that, but like your partner who lives with you will undoubtedly see you be messy, right? But that would be fine because you're like one unit. And then like also if your partner is then messy and you don't tidy things up before your friends come over, then that's like a reflection on you because like you're also at fault because you and your partner are one unit. So then oh my god, we really need to talk about monogamy culture as well because I think it's so interesting. But like this merging of identities where then we start to want to control our partners because our partners might do something that like embarrasses us or like makes which we wouldn't do, and then that would be a problem because other people will think that we would then also do that thing because they're our partner. And it's so silly, right? So then we're like also like starting to police the people who we see as like extensions of ourselves. This happens also with our children, right? And also I think with our parents, like to be
And with the
perfect.
dog, if Guido starts sniffing in like private property, I'm like, "Oh my gosh,
Oh my
Guido, you're not
god.
allowed. Please respect private property. It's looking badly on me."
I know, but is that so crazy, right? So like this is like one of the things that I think like perfectionism, it damages our relationship with ourselves because we're constantly trying to hold on to these kind of ideals of like this is what would make me good. This is what would make me a good person. This is if I do these things that I'm perfect. But it also like stops us from accepting the people that we love just like because we love them also as imperfect beings in front of other people. It's so strange.
Totally. And we've talked about this before in terms of like the service entrance in buildings and how before so much of our society was built up on hiding usually people of color who came in and did the majority of all of the work in the house
Yeah.
and the cooking, the cleaning, the like running of the household literally had a separate entrance a different access to the buildings in the house because that was supposed to be hidden. And I
Mm,
think that while we do not have the help anymore in our buildings, we are still conditioned to hide the fact that things take effort, things take work. We have to do the labor ourselves now. And I think
hmm.
that there is a certain amount of shame in our society around being seen being the one who does the labor because it's
Yeah.
gendered and it's racialized and it's something that is not part of like
Owning
historically
class.
white owning class white male Christian households, and therefore to be seen doing it is seen as degrading. I have that when I have to pick up my dog's poop on the street now. I'm like, I don't want anyone to watch me do this, but I will do this, especially when I'm with friends. But in general, like when people come over for dinner, dinner is supposed to be already prepared.
Mm,
And I think that that's something we are starting to unpack more and more, but that's still kind of a foundation. Or when Carson and I are doing a workshop together, often we'll have a structure or an idea of what could happen. And based on what's alive in the room, we're super open to changing that and working with what's there and what is needed rather than some script that we're trying to follow. But since we're two people, that means that we have to discuss and let the other person know that, hey, I'm going to go off script and introduce a different exercise here or change the order. And we try not to whisper into each other's ears and be like, but we'll just very openly in front of the group as we're having a chat be like, hey, do you think that this is the right exercise to go into next? And they'll be like, oh, no, I was thinking this one. We'll discuss it and then move forward. And I think showing people like our thinking process, what goes into it, why we've made the decisions we have, it fosters so much safety
mm.
and feeling included and understanding what's going on and why. And I think that that is something that we have denied people for too long.
Yeah, totally. And it shows us that it's like fine, right? That you can be in charge and you can be doing things without having to have everything completely sorted out. Like I think like that's like a leadership that's much more natural and inclusive, right? It's like more of a facilitative leadership than a dominating leadership.
I think a foundation of white supremacy culture, so much of it is based on a lack of trust. Like, you can't trust other people, and we need to find ways to exploit them and make sure that things aren't just open, available, accessible, out in the open. Like, this is what's going on, but it's about like power hoarding and secrecy and keeping things kind of to yourself. And I think that if you look at all of the characteristics, that is the like through line. It perpetuates structures of not trusting each other and trying to make things seem better than they are. Because if you're perfect, you have to like, hey, I'm perfect and you can't criticize me at all. And so I'm going to hide any mistakes or negative feelings or things that aren't going well because I just don't want to be vulnerable in any way. I don't want to have an opening where you can come and attack me.
Mm,
And I think that that's something that is coming up time and time again. If I look at all these different ways that white supremacy culture shows up in my life, it's like, in what ways do I not trust other people? And how do these characteristics show up as safety mechanisms to make me feel a semblance of control and safety
mm,
and a lack of vulnerability?
hmm. Well, and I think like that's the main way, right? When we look at like the lack of trust, that's the main way that it affects our relationships. And I think, you know, again, we're looking at white supremacy culture as like one of the many lenses because this is also about it's also about control, right? And control can also be linked to patriarchy and it can also be linked to capitalism and like so it's just one of those ways of looking at it, one of those frameworks. But I think like this desire to control the things that are scary and indeed what you're saying, like this idea of like whether we are not able to trust that our community will catch us is so important. And I think like what we talked about in the last podcast where we talked about like the neoliberal personality and how does neoliberalism actually create a lot of instability in our relationships and in our relationship to ourselves and create a lot of fear, right? And a lot of animosity because of competition, because of individualism, because where individualism is also a characteristic of white supremacy culture, by the way. But because of these things, how does that stop us from actually connecting with other people in a way that it is sustainable? And I think one of the biggest kind of ways that this lack of trust manifests is in another characteristic of white supremacy culture, fear of open conflict. I think like we are afraid of having open conflict. We are afraid of directly being able to talk about our grievances, take accountability and ownership, and like, you know, play with that because we don't trust each other and we don't trust that we will be seen as a person. And that stops us from being able to see the other person as a person who is not perfect. Right? Like we're both not perfect and we're both just going to do stuff and we have to figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah. I'm still so grateful for the fact that you and one of your partners would just have conflicts in front of me. Um, I think it's so amazing because I've brought this up to other people and everyone's like, oh, that's super irresponsible. You're actually not supposed to fight in front of someone else because you'll make them so uncomfortable. Like, they don't need to listen to all your dirty laundry. Like, you should keep that for when you're having a private moment. Like, and I think that there's nuance in there. There are certain times where it's, you know, if you're hosting a dinner party and all your friends come over and you're just bickering the entire time. Yeah, I understand why that was frustrating. Thank you for that counter argument. But what I really valued about the fact that you and one of your partners had conflict and, you know, not like fought, but just, you know, got into disagreement, voiced how you felt about the situation that was very frustrating, and then spent a moment in silence and then said, okay, how are you feeling now? What do you need? It gave me a script, like a very necessary script, because you can tell me so often, you should be really comfortable fighting. You should be able to air your grievances. You should do la 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 la, whatever. If you don't show me how, I'm not going to learn. And I think about that in terms of modeling things for kids. How did your parents or my parents not wanting to get into conflict in front of us and like keep those conversations for a private moment between those two, which many people would say is a very responsible thing to for the health of the family. How did that deny me a script that I could then use when I was having issues and when I wanted to address things that upset me? And
Mm-hmm.
of course, there are ways that I talked about that with my mom, or not my dad. My dad and I didn't really discuss grievances growing up. But like, of course there were moments when that happened, but it was a very power dynamic heavy conversation where that was my mom and I was a child, and there is an intrinsic power dynamic there. And watching you and your partner have that discussion, it was very level. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, that's how people who are seeing eye to eye can discuss a situation that's frustrating without attacking each other or saying, oh my gosh, you horrible person.
Yeah.
But just, I need this right now.
There are so many things that like I feel like I can hook onto in this. Like I think one of the things that you said at the beginning about this dirty laundry thing, right? Oh, I don't need to see you airing your dirty laundry. Well, I think one of the really big points of having like a healthy conflict culture is probably not having that much dirty laundry. And so Esther Perel talks about this thing called kitchen sinking, which is she uses it to describe like what happens in a dynamic, in a conflict dynamic, where it's like you start to just pile all the dirty dishes up into the kitchen sink. And now this small conflict, which was just about a really good example from me and my partner that you were there for, was I didn't think that he was driving very well, and I wanted to drive because I was feeling stressed out about his driving, and he didn't like that. So when we had conflict about that, it was just like, okay, so you know what? I really feel like I need to drive right now. I'm going to be upset with you later if you don't do that, or I'm going to keep being upset with you. He didn't like that. He was upset about that. We switched anyway. We just gave it a second and it was done. What would be kitchen sinking there would be like, you never let me drive because you think I'm a terrible driver, and this always happens. You always think that you can do things better than me. And remember this one time 3 years ago when you did this thing that was so, and that's kitchen sinking. And I think like that's a kind of conflict that becomes really difficult, right? Because you start to elaborate, and I am so guilty of this with one of my partners right now. I'm also doing this like all the time, and I catch myself doing it. But it's like this pulling all of these different things into the conflict, so that you can be right, so that you
I-
have the point. Yeah.
Interjection. I think that comes from not being skilled in mentioning something and worried that if you do mention something, you're going to be discredited and you're going to be seen as, where's this coming from? And so for me, I have to create a list of all the times that I've ever experienced something adjacent to this feeling to be like, this is something to bring up. You know, like
Yeah.
I can bring this up because look at my list of things that you've done that back it up. Whereas if
Yeah.
it's just normalized that you're allowed to just not be okay with something in the moment, you wouldn't need to prove it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't need the list. Okay, sorry. That just clicked for me. Continue.
No, exactly. And I think, like these things around having healthy conflict culture. Yeah. Like I come from a high conflict family. Like my family is like, there's like three more of me, right? We're loud, we're explosive, we are not afraid to confront each other on things. Like we can be really mean to each other. But there has always been an undercurrent of unconditional love in my family. And I'm very, very grateful for that because that has taught me that you can really fucking hate each other and also really love each other. And that even though you really fucking hate each other, you're going to get over it and you're going to be able to repair the relationship. And I think like having that imprint from my family and having the imprint of like, we're fighting right now and also we'll be fine has helped me a lot with becoming comfortable with conflict. And I think my relationships where I have had high conflict and I have been able to, so like this partner that you were referencing, right? We had a period of extremely high conflict where we were fighting all of the time about really foundational issues in our relationship and really like, are we going to be able to stay together? Like, is this something that is sustainable? Is this something that we still want? And actually, it's like that high conflict period that we managed to get out of through a lot of, trust and a lot of working on ourselves and working on the way that we related to each other by going through our conflicts and being like, oh, this happened here, this happened here, this happened here, that we learned to fight with each other. And we learned to trust that if we fight with each other, we are not going we are not going to break up. Right? It's like, oh, you did this thing that pissed me off and it's fine. I'm going to get over it because when you're with each other for 5 years, like you learn to be annoyed with each other and be comfortable with that annoyance, right? And I think like what's funny about that is that also for me links to perfectionism and links to this idea of like, am I able to be an imperfect person in the eyes of this person who loves me? Right? And I think you and me do this as well. I'm not punctual, you are highly punctual, you get upset when I'm late, and I'm always late. Like it's not like you getting upset actually makes me change my behavior because I'm still late, right? And that's who I am and that's who you are and it's fine. And in that it's like I also have just accepted like you love me even as an imperfect person, right? So you can see me in everything and you still love me. And I trust that you love me.
Always.
Yeah.
Always. I love you so
I love
much.
you so much. But it's that, right? And it's that trust that has given us the ability to have open conflict. And that doesn't mean it's easy, right? It's not like both of us are jumping at the opportunity to have some conflict between us. But it does mean that it's like, oh, okay, so you're really upset about something right now, or I'm really upset about something right now. And we're just going to move through that because it will be fine. Like, what's the
Totally.
worst that can happen?
A lot of stuff that came up just now for me in what you said was the feeling of that fear of being ostracized, that fear of being left out, that fear of being left behind, which I it goes back to the trust thing. But I think that coming from a bullying background, I am so aware at how quickly people can just like drop you and leave. And I think it's become very normalized and also championed in today's society of, is this person serving you? You know, what's the like Reddit response to anything is like lawyer up, get a divorce, fuck this person. Oh,
Yeah.
your mom said something to you once, estrangement, never talk to her again, cut people out. I don't know, you see it a lot in like also like BIPOC spaces where they're like, okay, but that's not an option for me. That's just an option for white people. why is it an option for us? Why are we so like comfortable saying no? If something happens, this
Yeah.
person is gone and dead for me. And I think that there is nuance there because some people cause a lot of harm. And
Hmm.
there are cases when setting a boundary of, hey, you are not allowed to have access to me anymore makes a lot of sense. But I
Hmm.
also know that we live in a cancel culture where, like, seemingly very small things can lead to that estrangement. We don't have that safety. And I think the only way to train yourself out of it and to be like, okay, if you think that any conflict is going to lead to this person hating you and thinking you're the worst, is how do you expand your window of tolerance for discomfort? I said it so slowly because that's another characteristic of white supremacy culture.
Is the right to comfort.
The right to comfort and being so unable to hold discomfort.
Mm,
And we see that of like the
mm,
Wall-Ization of our society, the fact
mm.
that we have literally, Wally has perfectly predicted our entire future. And we are
Terrifying.
turning into people who are just going to go off into space and have screens in front of our eyes and slurp all of our food down in mush and just constantly have,
Boo, I like to chew
uh,
stuff.
yeah, chewing is nice. We live in a society where all of our wants, needs, and desires are
Mm.
fulfilled in the press of a button. And therefore, anything that is uncomfortable in any way, we have no tolerance to hold that anymore. And it really, I feel it in my body. If anything happens, I get so upset so quickly. And I think a huge part of this unlearning of white supremacy culture and unlearning of the structures of society that are used to conform and fit in and to have everything be
Mm.
easy is learning how to step away from that. And I am so thankful that I am queer and that I have been queer from a young age because I have been practicing not going with what is easy and what is nice and
Yeah.
practice honor and who
Yeah,
you
what's
are.
right? What's right for
Yeah.
me? Right? Like what's right, what's for me, right? Because that's another one. Is like there is not only one right way, characteristic of white supremacy culture. But but yeah, like I completely agree. And I think we will at some point kind of go into the right to comfort a little bit more deeply, because I see this actually as one of the things in Western culture which is stopping us from doing deep political work. And I would love like to have a little bit more time and space to work that all out, because we're right now we're talking about conflict and accountability. We are not tangenting into a million different things. But yeah, like I think the right to comfort in our relationships is so wild. It's like, oh, we are, and I think especially this is again also a monogamy culture thing, right? It's like we are, because we see it show up in our romantic relationships a lot. It's like you are with me, and that means you cannot do something that makes me uncomfortable. And if you do that, then we're going to have to break up. And I think, like, for relationships that work and that are really like long term, for me at least, right? If you want to do it in a different way, that's so totally chill with me. I don't care. I have no judgment. For me, relationships that are long and that work are relationships in which I am able to be like, okay, that makes me uncomfortable. And also, it's fine. Like, I will figure out a way to deal with it. Right. And I'm not advocating going into your trauma space right away and being like completely fucked up about whatever thing is happening. But I mean, like, we have to be able to sustain discomfort in our relationships and to sustain, like, for example, for me, dating a new person, and if they go on a date with a different person, that I get a little bit insecure, that's fine. Like, I'm fine with being a little bit insecure. Like, it's really not a huge problem. Like, I could be like, oh, that's interesting. That's still there. And okay. But I don't need that other person to then completely change their behavior to make me feel better, right? Because, like, I don't have a right to comfort and a right to control for comfort, right? So
Yeah.
that one, like, I think 100%, we don't know how to handle discomfort. We don't know how to handle disconnection as well, right? Like, disconnection is also discomfort. So it's like, oh, this person is mad at me. We are in disconnection right now.
Oh my
Let's
God.
practice to hold
And
it.
characteristic of white supremacy culture, a sense of urgency that everything has to be really fast and very present and we have to deal with it now. And if we're not dealing with it now, then I think that that is so inextricably linked to our right to comfort, because any semblance of discomfort and disconnection and, oh no, I just got into a huge fight with my partner, what are we going to do? So often The answer is nothing. You just got into a fight. You just said, "Hey, I'm really pissed off." You had this moment. Leave each other. Go for a walk. Go calm down. Go have a dance party. Do something to calm your nervous system and feel regulated again before you continue talking. And I remember when I first started to think that maybe that was a tool that we should start implementing. And like, oh, maybe we should not be together if we're both really mad at each other right now and just leave it for a bit, which we really needed because I would try to force my partner to be my soothing technique for everything, where I was like, I'm upset, therefore you need to be the one who soothes me, and I need you to do this. Until I learned to reparent myself. But I remember this was when, before we moved in together, and we were like walking to their apartment, and they had the key in the door, and we are like about to walk inside, and I like looked and I said, I think I need to go to my apartment now. And they were like, oh, okay, but we are here. And I was like, correct. And they're like, that's probably a really good idea. And then I was like, but I'm already here. And like, if we just go to sleep in each other's arms, maybe that'll be really nice. And like, and I remember it was like a 20-30 minute conversation on their doorstep until I finally decided to go home.
Yeah.
And it was so nice. I was like, wow, I actually, sitting in this discomfort and sitting in this disconnection and tending, licking my wounds, kind of reflecting on my own patterns and what my role was in all this, which I wouldn't have had space to do if I was telling this other person what role they had in it. It also allowed me to trust that we were going to come back. We were going to have a conversation about it. It was still present. So it wasn't like poof, gone for nothing. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it gave me so much trust in this other person.
Yeah.
And another relationship that I had at the same time, we got into a huge fight and we haven't had a moment of being able to come back. So it's been over a year of us not talking to each other, even though they were like my best friend and someone who I lived with and wanted to continue to build a relationship with. And I think that is still coming from a feeling of a lack of trust. I'm like, I don't know if the conversations that we did have right after I moved out didn't go well. And so I also don't feel like if we were to go back into conversation, it would give me what I needed. And therefore, there are still so many walls and barriers up for that conversation. And this is something that we talk about in our workshops all the time, this is a lot of work. And going from like fear of open conflict, no tolerance for discomfort, all the stuff that we've been like socialized into this like trusting and I'm going to be really vulnerable. It takes a lot of effort, and it's not something you should do with everyone, because there are some people who can meet you in that and build that trust with you, and some people who can't. And you don't need to keep bashing your head against the wall and trying to be super vulnerable with people who can't meet you in your vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Like that was one of the best lessons I think I have gotten from my mother, was that at some point I was trying to be really vulnerable and really like open with someone who was not going to treat my vulnerability with kindness. And there was a power dynamic between us as well. And my mom was just like, nope, don't do it. Don't do it. And I think like that's one of the things that you and I, like that's a caveat that we put in our workshop, right? Is it's like, this is not going to work with everyone. This is not going to work for everyone. And you have to decide whether you want to apply these things or not. So like, do you want to grow with this person in a way that you create a relationship that can foster open conflict, right? That's up to you. Like, this is not, you cannot just like go around willy-nilly applying this to everyone, nor is this a measure of like how good you are as a person, how much care you deserve to have, right? And I think like that's one of the things that like I was kind of thinking of when you were talking, was this idea of regulation, right? Like, and the idea that we have to be able to regulate ourselves so that we can have conflict in like a good way. So I'm a high conflict person. I have learned to regulate a lot of that part of myself, but I am a high conflict person. So what does that look like? That looks like I can be really explosive. I can be really angry. And I can really yell and get very kind of like, I have had partners who are unable to be yelled at, right? And I've had partners who are really, really good at yelling with me so that we can really yell at each other and get out that energy and then stop. And I've had partners who are really good at de-escalating the situation so that I don't go into that. All three of those are great, right? They're all great. And none of these characteristics is going to determine whether the relationship succeeds or doesn't succeed, right? What determines whether the relationship succeeds or not is like, how much bandwidth are we willing to put into this relationship? So it's like, okay, if I feel like I'm going to yell and I feel like I'm going to be explosive and I'm confronted with someone who cannot receive that in any way,
Like your
then I
best
need,
friend from high school.
yes, like for example, my best friend from high school who I love dearly, but who, when you yell at her, is like a little dog that has to crawl under the couch, right? I am not going to do that, right? Like, and that's, and in this, it's also really important, I think, for us to recognize like the power dynamics that exist in our relationships when we are high conflict or conflict avoidant, and like, how did these things intermingle? And it is hard. And I mean, maybe you don't want to have a close romantic relationship with someone who you can't have a yelling match with, right? Or maybe you don't want to have a close romantic relationship with someone who you do have these like explosive yelling matches with. It's all fine, is what I'm trying to say. Yes, it's great when we can regulate ourselves. It's great when we can step away from our relationships and regulate ourselves. It's also really fine if you can't regulate yourself and you need someone else to help regulate you. But I think like this is the reason that we want to create networks, so that we don't have like this requirement lying on one person. Like, if you don't regulate me, then I cannot be regulated. Because like you existed before that person and you were able to regulate before that person. And if that person leaves your life, you will have to find a way to regulate yourself after that person leaves your life. So it makes no sense to put all of that on one person and have that as a requirement to have a relationship. Sorry, this was a bit of a regulation tangent, but I do think that it's important that we outline this.
It's also, it's so funny how much you are seeing all of this in a very romantic lens. Like it always ties back into your romantic partners, and it always ties back into monogamy, which I think is a very interesting take in conflict and accountability
Yeah.
in general.
Well, so and I think one of the funny reasons for that is like, because I think about it and I'm like, I'm referencing as romantic now relationships that are not necessarily romantic relationships, but I think one of the places that for me it shows up the most in my life is in my romantic relationships. Like that's where I have like these explosive, like passionate fights. Because in our sexo-affective relationships, that's kind of where we see a lot of the codependency come in most clearly, at least for me. Like I see codependency for me come in most clearly in my romantic relationships, and that's where I think like things like fear of open conflict come up. That's where I think like a lot more kind of this idea of like defensiveness. Like I find it much easier to receive critique from you than I do from one of my romantic partners or my, I don't even know what to call this relationship, my like, it's like transcended romantic or platonic. It like doesn't even really exist anymore. It's just a relationship, right? So we make that distinction, but is that distinction even valid? Like,
Yeah. I would love to talk about how it shows up in like activist spaces as well. Because
fear of open conflict,
yeah, fear of open conflict and
defensiveness, perfectionism, sense of urgency, either or thinking, all of these characteristics of white supremacy that we're consistently reproducing in our activist spaces, especially online.
sorry, is this a topic that speaks to you?
This is definitely a topic that speaks to me. Yeah, this has been like a space of frustration for me, right? Like, I think it was so funny. I was in a bus the other day and I was listening to these two people who were talking about their queer collective and that something had happened with someone and that they were just completely unequipped to take care of a conflict in their community. And one of them said, like, yeah, so, you know, like we're all talking about community, but like, what are we actually doing? Like, nothing. And I was like, that's because that's it for me, right? Like, community is a lot bigger than just like we are sharing the same space together. Community is like, okay, like I am committed to being here, even if you're being annoying, even if you do something that I don't agree with, even if we get into a big screaming match, I'm still going to be here, right? Like for me, at least, that's what building community is about.
And it's built on like shared values that we agree to uphold. And I think
Hmm.
this is a foundation. I just did a workshop based on a lot of the learnings I got from you, Carson, from like the Kurdish movement and how to deal with conflict and
Hmm.
feedback and giving other people critiques is like tying it to a set of cultural values. What is it that we believe in? What is it that we think is something that needs to be upheld? And how can I kind of center my critique and my feedback based on those values so that
Hmm.
we know that this is a collective experience where we are all trying our best
Yeah.
to work together towards these goals. And I think a lot of community building has lost that. It's just like, yeah, we're a bunch of people who like to go partying together, or we like to do this crafting thing together, and therefore we're a community. And I'm like, sure, you're a great friend group, but like community building means that we're like transcending
Hmm.
this particular group. There's a certain amount of values, and that other people are welcome to join this, but that there is like something we're building towards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that you brought up this idea of shared cultural values. Like, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And I think one of the things that I loved about learning about feedback and the process of giving feedback from the Kurdish movement was this idea of checking in with yourself before you give feedback and seeing, like, out of what place am I giving this feedback, right? Like, am I giving this feedback to this person because I look at them and I see that they are my like companion, my comrade, and I want to help them recognize something in themselves, not because I'm getting so triggered by it that I can't stand it, but because I genuinely see this as an opportunity for this person to become a better person. And that's what I'm prioritizing, right? So this also links to this right to comfort, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm uncomfortable by this thing. It doesn't automatically mean that it's the other person's fault. Actually, quite often, I think it's our own process that's making us feel uncomfortable. And so, like, having this shared value of, like, I'm here to reflect on myself and to only, like, critique you in this way if I actually think it will serve you, right? Like, if I think that it's something that I'm doing from a place of love, right? From a place of openness, from a place of support, and that that's like the right way to give someone a critique. And I think that's why, like, these shared values of being able to say, you know, I can critique you, and that doesn't mean that you're bad, right? It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that I'm giving up. Actually, I'm doing this because I love you, right? Like, I'm telling you this because I see that you are repeating this structure, or you're repeating this thing that we're trying not to do in our community, and I owe it to you, right? Like, I owe it to you as my companion, as my comrade, to talk about it with you. And then I really like that they're like, you don't respond to the critique. You just take it, and maybe it's right and maybe it's not right. And you get to decide that for yourself. But you just have to you just have to listen to it, and then you don't talk about it, because then you can't do characteristic of white supremacy, your defensiveness, right? And you don't perform your defensiveness in front of other people. You don't perform your defensiveness in front of this other person. You stop trying to prove to this other person why their perspective is wrong, and you just take it, and you're like, okay, cool, thanks for giving that to me. I'm going to go decide whether that feels correct for me or not, and we continue.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's amazing. And again, right, like, this is why we say we don't do this with everyone, because you're going to be in spaces where, like, your annoying white male professor does not want to go and think about whether or not he's actually reproducing patriarchy or reproducing white supremacy culture, right? He's not going to want to do that. So you can't have this expectation from everyone, and that's fine. Like, it's okay. But I think, like, these are nice things when we're talking about building political community, or we're talking about building stronger friendships, stronger relationships, also within our family, to be able to do that. I think it's nice.
I do all of my learning now by giving people exercises and telling them to do stuff and then listening to their like observations based on the exercises. And
Mm-hmm.
one, whenever I'm talking about conflict culture or any kind of feedback, I like to start with, we're going to get into a circle. I'll give you a sentence stem that you can then complete the sentence. And that is how we're going to come up with a bunch of shared values that we have. And then we'll go around in your groups, and every person gets to share as many instances that you would like of the times that you did not live up to those values that you just agreed upon were important. And I tend to do this because I don't have a lot of time. And I think it's easiest to do some self critique rather than getting into the messiness of like external other critique.
100%. No, but also important to build like your own ability to see yourself and critique yourself in front of other people, because that will make it easier later to receive it from other people in front of other people.
Yeah. And also a way for you to reflect on how did I contribute to this dynamic?
Mm-hmm.
You never tell me when things are upsetting. You always keep it to yourself. You never just like come up and say, "Hey, that was annoying." Cool. How do I create a space that allows this person to come in and tell me when they are when they're upset about something? Do I create a space where that is welcome and encouraged and
Mm-hmm.
allowed? Or am I contributing to the fact that they don't feel safe enough with me in order to give me that feedback? So starting with yourself is very important.
Just going to quickly reference Esther Perel one more time, because she actually formulated this really well on a podcast I was listening to the other day. It's one of her podcasts, Where Shall We Begin? I don't remember which one, but she talks about how basically sometimes you can get upset with the other person. And by getting upset with the other person about a thing that's happening, so for example, not sharing their feelings, you are making them again into that thing that you're upset about them being. So if I'm yelling at you, Ella, for not sharing your feelings, right? And you can't get a word in edgewise, and I'm so upset with you. And I'm like, you never talk about how you're feeling. It's so frustrating. It's like so annoying. And I'm just expecting you to be completely fine with the fact that I'm upset. Then, like, I am again creating a space where you become the person who doesn't care about their feelings, and you become what it is I'm angry at you about becoming.
Yes, totally, totally. And I think that's something, I mean, if we want to go down that rabbit hole, how often people get mad about something or get scared about something and so start acting in anticipation of that thing happening and therefore causing it to happen. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like, and
Me, I do that.
I do that.
Like
Um,
that.
and this the self-reflection and the self-critique as a foundation for
Mm-hmm.
understanding how you contribute to a situation and like learning your patterns.
Mm-hmm.
A, why conflict is such a delightful moment of you being able to actually feel this in your body and learn about yourself. But it's so
Mm-hmm.
important. And I didn't realize that other people don't spend their entire lives analyzing their impact on a situation until I started doing this work with other people. And I'm like, okay, so what are your patterns? How do you, like, how are you defensive? And anyway, that's a tangent. The original point is I'm learning from the reflections that other people have done through doing this exercise. And one person was like, I was really worried about going into self critique because I'm a highly self critical person and I'm constantly shaming myself and yelling at myself and saying, you don't do this, you don't do that. Like, and it's such an unproductive shame spiral that I get
Mm-hmm.
caught in. And doing an exercise where I had to critique myself, I was like, here we go again. But the fact that it was based on shared values and I could tie it to that made me realize, oh, that's how to get out of this behavior I don't like. Like before, it was just self critique without an ending, it was just shame. And the fact that I've tied it to, oh, this is a shared value that we all agree is important. How can I live that value now as a like proactive way into it? Completely
Beautiful.
changed that. And I was like,
I love that.
oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
I love that so much. I love that so much, and I think like for me, that is a really big part, because like I am also a super self-critical person, and I actually find that being so like unbelievably denigrating to myself makes it harder for me to receive critique from other people, because like I don't feel safe in myself, right? If I feel safe in myself, if I'm like, okay, you know, like my foundation is good, like I'm a good person, or I'm like at least trying, because there are no good people, there are no bad people. I'm like trying, right? I'm doing my best. It's really okay. And I like go into like that space of like, I am me and I'm doing the best that I can with the tools that I have. My favorite catchphrase. And I can hold myself in that, then like, and I'm not being like, oh, you should have done it like this. You did it this badly. You're doing this terribly. Then I can actually receive critique from other people in a way that's like, oh yeah, okay, I can see that I did that. That's not great. That's not ideal. And that's not what I want to be continuing in my relationships. And so, like, I think that that is a really, really important thing, is like when we're able to critique ourselves from the space of like holding ourselves, being like, we're doing the best that we can, And we're not doing it in the most useful way or in the most constructive way all of the time, and that that's okay, right? And that we don't judge ourselves on that, then we're able to kind of get out of those spirals of shame thinking, because it's not like I really don't think that any of us are intrinsically terrible people.
Me neither.
We do shit things sometimes, but we're
Oh
not
yeah.
intrinsically terrible people.
No. And I recently listened to a very interesting podcast by Adrienne Marie Brown, How to Survive the End of the World. I will link it in the description. And it was all about like Christian hegemony and the link of the far right with Christianity. And I was talking to my dad the summer of Black Lives Matter and talking about George Floyd and how we should abolish the police. And my dad, who was just like, yeah, but some people are born bad. There are bad people who are just born bad.
Mm,
And that I was like, wow, that's a really hard worldview to engage with in any way. I don't know how to like
yeah,
all of the things that I'm proposing are based on the assumption that we are not born bad. That
yeah.
like there are some people who've done horrible stuff, but how can we change the environment to like counteract that?
Well, I think this binary is interesting, like this good bad binary, this idea of determinism, all of this, which is really present in Judeo Christian society, especially, for example, in Dutch society, where we have like this strong kind of Calvinist background. Um, and this is also either or thinking, binary thinking, also a characteristic of white supremacy. And I think also something that deeply affects us in our relationships, because you get to this place of like, it's either this or it's this. It can't be both at the same time. It can't be neither of those things. It can't be a spectrum. It can't be like a universe of things to explore. It has to be either this or this. And I think like that binary thinking that also comes out with this good, bad person thing, we have that internalized as well. And one of the ways that I see this show up, and I think like the reason that I'm bringing this in now is because I do think that this is an extension of white supremacy culture, is this idea that you're either born good or you're born bad. And if you're born bad, then you have to do everything at all costs to hide the fact that you're bad from other people. And this is like why I think that if I'm in like this super self-critical spiral of like, you're bad, 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 that I can't take critique from other people without becoming defensive. Because if I'm trying to hide how bad I am from everyone and someone is like, ha, I noticed that you're bad, then I'm like, I have to convince you that I'm not bad, so that even if I am bad, at least you don't know about that. Right. So it's like this really like deep kind of cultural binary that I think shows up in really unhelpful ways. And I think that's like a big part of this feeling of like defensiveness, this feeling of like only one right way, perfectionism it links to, and then this either or, this binary thinking, because it's like, we're not either good or bad. And like we again, like we're all just doing the best we can most of the time. And that's it. Like I mean, there's not a lot else that we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all just doing the best we can with the tools we have, and there's not a
We
lot
are.
else we can do.
Yeah.
I was thinking of also bringing up care from erotics of liberation. I'm part of the liberation practice field. And
Mm,
the last session we had, we were talking about accountability and saying, what does over accountability look like and what does under accountability look like? And how can we just get to a place of someone comes to you and says, hey, I really didn't like that you did that. That made me upset. And just saying, you are correct. I did do that. I could totally see how you're upset about that. What do you need right now? And how simple it is. Like
mm,
when you're able to do that and provide that space for someone to just validate their feelings and not go into, oh well, from my perspective, like no, that doesn't matter right now, right? What matters right now is their perspective, their subjective experience.
mm,
How can you just say, yeah, I did do that behavior. I can totally see how that is upsetting. How can we rebuild the trust between us now? What do
mm.
you need right now? Um,
Yeah.
and over accountability is that feeling of I'm a bad person. I do bad things all the time. How can I remove myself from relationships to not inflict my badness onto them and make it their problem? And I think that
Yeah.
that is something that I have had to work on for a very long time of
Mm-hmm.
trying to not see myself as an inherently flawed person, trying to inflict my badness on other people and just say
Yeah.
no. And sometimes I fuck up And sometimes I do things that are kind of shitty. And I can just say, yeah, I did that. I'm really sorry. That sucks. What do you need right now? Because I would still like to be in connection with you and I want to repair this together.
Mm.
Yeah.
Love you, Ella.
I love you, Carson.
I think an interesting thing here is also being on the other side, like holding someone accountable. What does that look like, right? And can you be okay? Because this is also this only one right way characteristic of white supremacy. It's like, oh, you did this thing and it was upsetting to me. And if the other person says, yeah, I can see how that would be upsetting, that you're like, no, it was upsetting. It was wrong. You did something wrong. And for me, like, I think this is a really interesting thing because I see it for me showing up in fights as well, where if someone is like, yeah, I can see how that would have been like this, that I'm like, I don't trust that you actually understand that you did something wrong. And then it's like, okay, maybe they didn't do something wrong. Maybe I'm just responding or reacting to something that they did. And that's also my responsibility. And it's not just their responsibility. And I think like this is one of the things that I like about kind of like this. I need to stop referencing Esther Perel.
Hey, we haven't talked about Ismatu once.
Not this. No, this is the Esther Perel podcast. But one of the things I really like about the way that she approaches conflict in relationships is she's not so interested in who is right and who is wrong. She's just kind of interested in like, okay, what's happening, right? It doesn't really matter if the thing happened that the other person says or if it happened the other way. That's not so interesting. It's like, what are the dynamics that are under it, and like how can you become comfortable with not being right, and how can you become comfortable with like maybe even not being fully understood in your experience, but how can you still find connection? And I think like that's something that we have the tendency to skip over once we talk about like kind of political communities or communities, like larger communities, is this idea of like, oh well, we're operating under a certain political theory, and if you don't operate specifically under that political theory, then you're not operating in the correct way, and we have the right to kick you out, or I have the right to shame you, or I have the right to force you into a process of accountability, right? Because accountability, you can't force someone to go through that process with you. Like maybe this other person is like, yeah, I can see why that would be upsetting, but I don't want to be in an accountability process with you. You're going to have to figure out how to heal that trauma by yourself, sweetie, because like the people who are like harming you are not always going to be ready to be in a process with you, and that's fine. And sometimes the harm might just be because of you having a bruise somewhere, right? And that person just happened to press on it, but they did not make that bruise, right? And maybe someone else would have responded in a completely different way. So it's like so many different things here that I think like this only one right way characteristic is so, for me, so important. And it's such a thing that I see showing up in myself all the time, where I'm like, no, I'm right. My analysis is correct. And I'm just like, I need to let that go. Or no, my mom would say, I can't say I need to let that go. My mom would say, you have to say, I want to let that go. I would like to learn to let that go, because then I'm choosing for it.
You were saying one right way, how that relates to conflict and accountability. And I would also say how that relates to political activism and finding a way that you can let go of there being one right way that is going to save all of the issues that we are facing societally around the entire globe. There is no one politic. This is what I learned from you. There is no one politic that is going to satisfy all of our wants, needs, and desires. Mm-hmm. And I think thinking that is part of the conformity aspect of white supremacy culture, where everyone needs to smooth your edges and conform to the standard cookie cutter vibe so that we can have one politic that is going to help everyone. And I think the more that you can divest from that and say, okay, what does this current situation need right now? And how can we find something that works for this community, this group, this relationship that meets our needs outside of the script? Because we're not going by the script anymore. That's in general. No more scripting. Let's kind of figure out what it is that we need in this current situation outside of what society has told us we need.
Yeah. And that's why I'm an anarchist, right? And this is why I see anarchism as inherently in opposition to white supremacy, is because anarchism for me is really about like self-determination. So it's like, oh, you want to do that way? Even if I don't understand it, I am going to just let you do that as long as it's not harming the environment, it's not harming an animal, and it's not harming a human. right? So like these three things that make up like ecology, if it's not like doing ecological harm, then I really don't care what you're doing.
Do we have any final takeaways or one thing that we would like to say in summary?
All right. So I think like we've had a really long conversation about kind of how all of these different parts and different characteristics of white supremacy culture are showing up in our relationships and actually like at least in my experience really causing me to have like less strong, less resilient, less loving relationships also in my relationship to myself, right? And I think like this relates back to this thesis that we posited at the beginning that like all of our racial justice work and so like our work to dismantle the systems of white supremacy is healing for each and every one of us. And I do think that that's the case, at least for me.
Yeah, I think at the beginning we said, name it to tame it. And I think naming all the ways that I have found a sense of urgency come up in my life, perfectionism, all of these things, just bringing that awareness into how that is a racialized way of inhabiting the world and how that supports
Yeah.
a racialized category that I try to put myself into in all these different ways because I want to have access to comfort and making life easy for myself. It also robs me of those moments of friction where I can keep going and move forward within a relationship or a space. It robs me of deep knowing and understanding of myself. I think right now a huge buzzword is authenticity. And I think it's so hard to be authentic when you are still perpetuating all of these characteristics. So finding
Oh,
ways
100%.
to slow down, say, hey, what's alive right now? What's happening? What defense mechanisms are coming up? How can I use that to learn about myself? How can I lower those to truly connect with people, to trust people, to be vulnerable? That commitment, first of all, names whiteness, so it doesn't make it a default category. It's a way to dismantle it, and it's something that is going to foster a more beautiful relationship in all aspects of our lives, not just because we're some white saviors who need to save people of color. But again, how do you
We
need to
need
show
we
up for
need to be
yourself
saved. We need saving as well.
first and foremost? And how do we tear down empire? This is
Yeah.
also something I was thinking about of it was so clear to me. I feel like it's like you cannot deny that the leaders of the pro-Palestine movement, whenever something happens, when Jewish people are the first person to stand up and say, no, we do not stand with this because it is not anti Semitic. You cannot say that this is anti Semitic. We are Jewish people who fully believe in the liberation of Palestine.
Mm.
I was like, there is no way that anyone can now deny that white people shouldn't be at the forefront of racial justice and of saying, we do not accept this. This is not a culture that we would like to be part of or stand behind in
Yeah.
any way, shape, or form. So
Yeah.
it is our responsibility to stand up and say, we do not accept this.
Exactly.
And we're going to be recording this podcast during Black History Month. It is now end of March. We were going to record this during Black History Month. And I was very inspired by this TikTok I saw by Lena Potts. I'll link it in the description, where she talks about the fact that slavery is always taught as Black history and it's not taught as white history. The focus is always on what happened, the trauma of it, and the victimization of the people that it occurred to, and not on the agency of the perpetrators of that harm. And so, this is why white supremacy culture is a cultural aspect. On all levels of society, we are not taught to take accountability for our actions, but very much taught to hide anything that could get you in trouble and instead focus on all the ways that you're a good person. And that is reflected in our interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, because if we actually learned how to be accountable, then we would have to give a lot of money back
And land.
and a lot of land. And that would be problematic for empire, but that's for a different time. Well, I think like for me, one of the main things that comes out of this discussion is just like how prevalent a lot of these things are in our society and in our relationships and like how I think like awareness can help us, but a lot of it is also like finding people who want to practice this kind of thing with you and putting it to work and being willing to stick with each other for a really long time trying to sort it out, because it's hard work, and like it's really only through practice that you're going to be able to do this, because you can intellectualize your way through anything, but then the moment that you actually have to put it into practice, it's going to be a lot harder. But I love like going through this and reflecting on it, and I think for me personally it's made such a huge difference in the way that I live my life and the way that I relate to other people and other political actors. So yeah.
Speaking of practicing, Carson and I do workshops on how do we want to practice a new way of relating and feeling that in our bodies and getting comfortable with it. It is something that we do for the general public, and something that more and more I have been doing with activist groups that really have an open conflict and are like, how are we going to get out of this now? Because I work with activists and queer trans people in general, it is very hard to finance myself. And as anti-capitalist as I'd love to be, I still need to make rent. Which is why we have created a Patreon. It is stuck in my throat. It's so hard to do this whole spiel.
Yeah, it is hard to do this spiel, but like it's also, I mean, you know, we put time and effort into making these resources. Like I think both of us do a fair amount of free work. Like I try to also do my fair amount of like political work, whether that be like writing or translating or whatever. And those things are limited when we have to work a job, right? Like I work an NGO job. Like why do I work an NGO job? Yeah, for paying my bills. That's why I do it. And I think both of us would love to be able to do this full time. And I think that's why we set up the Patreon, right? Like, is like, can we build a base where we can actually do this work and offer it for free and be able to survive in this world, basically.
And we recently made it to 100 subscribers on YouTube. Amazing. Thank you, everyone.
Can't believe that. I literally like I love each and every one of you, because for me, we've started this and I was like, oh, no way people are gonna listen to this at the first 10 episodes, no one's gonna listen to it. And there's 100 of you that are interested in seeing what else we release, and I love that.
Yeah. There are 100 of you, and if each of you gave €5 a month, that would be like €250 that we could do good stuff with and support all of the activist work that we're doing on the ground.
Per person.
Yeah, each. I think that's very important to name as well, because so often what you see to the common layperson is people posting Instagram videos and podcasts and resources to disseminate information. And I think it's really important to remind everyone that a lot of the work that we're doing is in person with other people. And yeah, that takes up a lot of time, and a lot of resources. And it's so much fun doing this podcast. And if this could be a way that we could support ourselves and make sure that that work reaches even more people who need it, because as Ismatu taught us, all cost is a barrier, and the people who need this work the most cannot always afford it. So if there's any way that some random Swedish father or
Shout out to the random Swedish father. Honestly, that comment literally made my entire life. I was like, it just was so sweet. So thank you for that.
It was so sweet. But you know, share this with your rich friends, share this with people who have access to resources, and what might not seem like a lot to them is a lot to us.
Plus, like, it's just, you know, we want to make sure that everything is free. And I mean, if there's a lot of people who can give us €2 a month, like that will already make a difference, because every cost is a barrier, right? So it's also for us, every cost that we have is a barrier to creating and doing more of the work that we want to do. Like I was thinking about that for a really long time. I'm coming out of a burnout. I really want to start writing again. And I realized that my reintegration into my workspace is taking basically all of the energy that I have, and that I am left without energy to write. And why am I doing that? To pay my bills. So there's actually like, I'm unable to do this work that I think is important, that I love to do, because I have cost as a barrier. So I think like those are important things for us to think about. And we would just love to be able to do something community funded also, so that we're just not dependent on like any one single source. And we're able to keep making content that we love and that we think is important. So if you love us, then you can join our community on Patreon. We ask
Yeah.
questions. We would love to like engage more with you.
Also, if you have any ideas of, I would rather not be advertisement funded, but
Mm,
maybe there's like a really cool anarchist collective who has funding that they've secured and they want to fund us and we can do advertisements for them. I'm down to just
yeah.
shout out cool community projects or something. So send us like $10 and we'll do that for you.
Yeah, like literally. Or if you know of any ways to get funding for these kinds of projects that are from like institutional funds that will not want to have any influence on the content that we make, we would really love to hear about it. So please do send us a message. And yeah,
Thank you so much for being part of my practice space, Carson. I feel like I've learned so much about myself through my relationship with you and the fact that this is a space where I can make mistakes and be messy and get overstimulated and blah, blah, blah. But we still love each other and we're still here and we're still committed. It makes me
yeah.
very happy, safe, and calm in my body. So thank you for you.
Yeah, same. I literally like you're one of the biggest resources that I have of unconditional love, support, and a serious feeling of community. So I love you so much. And I'm so happy that we're friends and
Yay.
partners and all of the in between.
And thank you to whoever listened. I hope that
Yes,
you will take these moments, maybe check out the website that we've been talking about so much. It's a great resource.
it
And
really is.
reflect on yourself and your patterns and your relationships and how you show up in this world. We're not trying to get you to do anything. We just really want you to name it to tame it.
Thanks for listening to Pieces.
You can find us on Patreon through the show notes, where we would love to hear what stuff resonated with you, where your questions were, and what you would like us to expand upon.
And we hope this had some moments of learning for you. And we also hope you turn in for our next conversation. In our next time on Pieces, we'll be talking about how toxic masculinity lives in all of us.
Can't wait. Gang, gang.
Scary, but good topic.
All right.
Whew.
Love and solidarity. Is that your tummy?
Was it so loud?
I heard that.
My bad. That was indeed my tummy.